Day 242 of the Ukrainian war map, also known as the Russo-Ukrainian War. Jozzy here, and today is another quick update as I take that simplified and down-to-earth approach to some of the most important happenings on the ground in Ukraine today. And as always, I'll start off with the Russian military losses. So as of the 23rd of October, in the last 24-hour reporting period, there's been an additional 400 of the Russian military personnel losses, as you can see there. Also, when we take a bit of a look at the hardware losses on the Russian side, so bigger than average day, I would say, for today. So a whopping 18 armored combat vehicle losses on the Russian side, followed by an additional 5 tank losses, 14 artillery, and 2 choppers. And I'll mention one of those choppers shortly in the video as well. Also, before I move back to the map, just quickly, my homegrown hobby of my captured Russian hardware list in working order. So still a work in progress, but this is a refreshed, newer version. Now with more entries, a higher level of specificity. I won't get into the nitty-gritty of this one today, but soon we'll have even more entries on here and a dollar figure of value on each category as well, because Russia is truly Ukraine's #1 arms supplier. Then we'll move back across to the map, and generally within the last 24 hours, Russia has, Russia's actually shot 40 cruise missiles and 16 kamikaze drones throughout the country of Ukraine, of which 20 missiles and 11 drones were shot down. But in fact, today we start well outside of the Ukrainian map here into Russia, where there is a location in Russia called Irkutsk Oblast, and this is really breaking news, in fact. A Russian fighter jet crashed. Now, the jet was a Sukhoi S-30. Interestingly, this location is very, very far from the front line of the war. Perhaps the fighter plane was traveling to Ukraine, but again, this isn't the first time something like this has happened. In fact, the second one within the space of a week, a similar event happened on October 17th as well. And at 35 million USD a pop, this is a pretty expensive loss. Then just before we move into Ukraine, in Belarus, where there's a bit of a military build-up here, combination of Russian and Belarusian forces. So at one of these Belarusian staging grounds here, there was a conflict that broke out between Russia and Belarusian soldiers. Apparently, the clashes have reportedly had to do with Russians' insolent attitude toward Belarusians. And if that sounds familiar, then you'd be right, because just last week, a Russian location training ground, there was an issue with the Russian conscripts not getting along with the conscripted Tajiks, so causing the Tajiks to open fire at the Russian soldiers, eliminating quite a number of Russian soldiers. In fact, I think from memory 19 or 20. Various more wounded as well. But I've got to say, Russia doesn't have the greatest track record for tolerance or compassion towards other countries, or even if it's some of its own minority groups. Then we'll move across to the capital of Kyiv, where the Kyiv's air defenses downed a Russian Kh-101 cruise missile in the Kyiv Oblast here. Now, this type of Russian cruise missile is meant to be le crème de la crème, or the cream of the crop, because it's an expensive shoot down with a single missile costing 13 million USD. That's just massive. Now, some analysts suggest that the Russian government overpaid for this very specific type of missile here. So overpaid by millions per missile to these Russian weapons contractors who supplied them, and the remaining funds of which are speculated to have been misappropriated through corruption, obviously, assisting some Russian oligarchs to purchase their own yachts, or should I say super yachts. Then we'll move across quickly to the Kirovograd Oblast, where we've got a photo here of a burning substation in the region, published by the Ukrainian President Zelensky himself through one of his social media channels. And also in somewhat nearby Rivne, where some energy infrastructure was hit as well. And again, this is Russia's main goal now, literally designed to push the Ukrainian population to some sort of a fearful submission, surrendering state. And I mean, look how far this is from the front line. It has no direct, probably even indirect impact on the front lines whatsoever. And from what I've witnessed, every strike on a Ukrainian city or infrastructure hardens the resolve of the Ukrainian people even more. So it's backfiring on Putin, basically. And in fact, Ukrainian citizen polling every quarter has actually shown this to be the case too. Then we'll move across to the Donbass region. I'll mention quickly and briefly about the northern Donbass area. A lot of things are happening here in the Svatove and Kremina locations, only it's not safe to mention it just yet. And moving down, as for the intense and ongoing fighting and artillery dual exchanges between each side at Bakhmut, for instance, right there. Bakhmut still holds. Russian forces were said to sustain huge losses in the last day trying to push here unsuccessfully as well. Oh, and also yesterday and the day before yesterday, I showed some footage of the Russian forces setting up some dragon's teeth as a sort of a anti-vehicular mechanism for frontal attacks by the Ukrainian forces. Now they are set up in this region here, and arguably it could be used to stop Russian forces fleeing and surrendering too with a tank or a BMP or an infantry fighting vehicle or all sorts of things. Driving away basically. But probably my biggest concern with this setup is that it's just the way that it's set up. It's excluding the northern Donbass Oblast of Luhansk, as if to be a foregone conclusion that Russia will cede some land in the north here soon. Though truly it's probably just the Russian contract militia group, the Wagner group, staged in this area, creating their own fortifications, not really caring about the larger goals within the war, irrespective of the larger battle really, and what Russia and Putin himself want to do. Oh, and I should probably quickly mention the real and properly effective versions of Dragon's Teeth are actually meant to penetrate into the ground at least a few feet. These ones, by contrast, are small, above the ground, and just cosmetic in nature. So, you know, good luck with that. I just want to quickly show you, not exactly captured hardware or loot, but here is a Polish supplied T-72 tank spotted in Bakhmut with the Ukrainian armed forces, which is in actual excellent condition. And unlike many Russian tanks, was clearly always well maintained, this one. And this one has even been upgraded with a number of modifications too, such as the additional rubber sheet armor that's been added to the hull, as well as a slat armor to the rear of the turret too. Also moving down the Donbass, the Russian army shelled Avdiivka overnight. And this is a frontline settlement, hard to see, let's zoom, there it is, right there. A little bit further south, that has seen a lot of Russian attempts to capture over many months, albeit unsuccessfully. Although if Russia does have a sufficient number of troops, they could actually close that gap. But a lot of their troops are actually held up in Soledar and Bakhmut, up quite a bit more north. So maybe not that one after all. Then in some terms of some Russian hardware captures, the Ukrainian forces captured a Russian BMP-2 infantry fighting vehicle in this region here as well. Then we'll move across a bit further down to Nikopol in the Danipro Petrovsk Oblast, where a Shahid drone was shot down in the district. So there it is, Nikopol right there. Then in nearby Zaporizhia, where it's got quite the front line, the Ukrainian armed forces slowly moved forward in some frontline locations in the oblast, although it's not yet shown here on the map. Although if I do pull out the date map, we'll have a look. Yeah, nothing that you can see. In fact, just across the border, in fact, technically the Donbass or Donetsk Oblast, you can see there was a push on the kind of like a little mole. So that's Ukraine's actually pretty good at taking out those little humps, those bumps. Oh, and then close by in the city of Zaporizhia itself, of course part of the larger Zaporizhia Oblast, was attacked by Shahid drones overnight. Big old hole in the ground, that one there. Then we'll move to Kherson. Certainly a lot happening here again. So we see a number of withdrawal movements from the Russian forces to the south of the Danipro River. So, whilst at the same time, they appear to be conducting some measure of delaying actions, so as to not have such an unprecedented and horrendous withdrawal like we saw in the Kharkiv Oblast about 6 weeks ago. So, the Russian forces have completely abandoned some positions, such as Sherivny and Shakalov right there. And it looks like now, potentially, Berislav right here is, well, potentially, yeah, said to be the defensive line, the new defensive line for the Russian forces. Of course, we've got some reports that Miluve or My Love is liberated. And even having said all of this, unfortunately, we haven't seen anything reflected on this part of the map for days to weeks now, as this Ukrainian counteroffensive is still ongoing and, need I say, OPSEC again. But also further down near the Inulets River along here. There's also a few unconfirmed reports that Russian forces are starting to abandon their positions at this location here, which could mean a pullback to the transportational ferries to get to the south side, or indeed even back to Kherson City in particular. And also remaining occupiers or Russian occupiers are said to be changing into civilian clothing as well. This happened a few weeks ago, or probably 6 weeks ago again, with the Kharkiv withdrawal from the Russian forces, when the Russians were getting overrun in that oblast. But the Yuki forces seem to track down those Russian forces in civilian clothing pretty well and arrest them. And no doubt the Yuki forces are going to be even more prepared now of pretty much searching for and apprehending wolves in sheep's clothing. Oh, and this next part is quite funny. So even the Russian forces on Telegram really confirming the withdrawal. So the Russian 205th Separate Motorized Rifle Brigade mention of those two towns a little bit north that I've mentioned there, so Sherivny and Shaklovai, stating that withdrawal was according to plan. It's almost like they're memeing themselves. So the Russian Telegram message also said, today is a difficult day. The troops are systematically withdrawing. It also went on to talk a bit and then say everything is going to plan and order. And I really don't think they realize that the international community has just made a meme or mockery out of the face-saving line going according to plan. Truly of which is probably one of the biggest Russian fun-poking memes within this war. As current. Oh, and would you believe it? Ukraine shot down yet another Russian attack helicopter in this region in the last 24 hours. So the Russian Ka-52 Alligator chopper swooped in to the front lines, as they always do, and sigh. Surprise, surprise, it was taken out. It was probably on either a supply or a pickup mission. Sometimes they're used to provide air support for ground troops. Either way, they're just too darn close to the front line, and therefore picked up by the Ukrainian air defenses. Also note, this is the second Ka-52 helicopter that was downed by Ukraine within the last 24 hours alone, in pretty much the very same spot. Also in Kherson City, a sign of the change in times, gas stations and pharmacies are now refusing to accept rubles, demanding payment only in hryvnias, which is the Ukrainian currency. Just like old times. Also, somewhere roughly in this region in the south, a Russian S-300 surface-to-air missile system was eliminated, likely with a HARM missile. These are the specialty anti-radar missiles provided from the States. And although the S-300 SAM systems are previous generation systems, they still attract a modern-day cost of about 150 million USD. And missiles at a cost of about $1 million each. So we're probably looking at an upwards cost of about a $200 million loss for the Russian forces here just today in the space of just a few seconds. And the reason why I haven't yet mentioned any Ukrainian military cost losses is because, unlike Ukraine, Russia doesn't have an unlimited checkbook like the US/NATO checkbook by contrast. Like most wars, it's a war of attrition. And then also in the south, in terms of captured Russian hardware, the Ukrainian forces captured a Tu-S19 Mr. S SPG. It's in relatively good condition. I realize at a glance they may look like tanks, but look at the size of the turret on these absolute behemoths. So not the cannon, but the big head itself. Now these are self-propelled howitzers that instead shoot from a much larger distance than a tank, but also have less armor than a tank as well. They're very, very tall too. And lastly, in another Russian hardware capture in this region, a quite uncommon Russian MT-LB-U variant of an armored personnel carrier. Then we'll move across just briefly to Mykolaiv, where overnight the air defenses in Mykolaiv shot down 11 Russian drones. Mykolaiv is starting to really show its capability in terms of air defenses there, as it gets more and more equipped as the weeks and months go by. Still not enough, and Ukraine probably only has maybe about 30% of the full air defenses that it requires, so it's putting them in select locations, for instance this location here, because Mykolaiv was getting hit pretty hard for a long time. Then just a few little bits and pieces of news today. So we'll start off with some German news. So German Chancellor Scholz has had to explain why he's refusing to send German tanks to Ukraine. He said that his country does not want to act alone, meaning that other Western countries should also send their tanks to Ukraine if Germany does as well. The larger concern for NATO countries sending tanks and fighter jets to Ukraine is that these are not purely defensive systems, but rather they're mainstay frontline offensive systems instead, that arguably change the balance of power in a war. So it's seen as sort of a direct NATO involvement, so it is a slow process. So what's mostly been happening instead is other Eastern European countries with older Soviet gear has been sending it to Ukraine, of which Ukraine already knows how to drive a Soviet tank or use Soviet weapon systems. So more of a grey area that's accepted in the end in that case scenario. But yeah, the whole thing's tricky. And in some other news, overnight, no less than 1 million people in Ukraine lost power due to Russian strikes on energy infrastructure throughout the country. Locations like Melnitsky and Rivne and Lutsk copped the brunt of it for the most part. Again, locations which are so far away from the front line that it's heavily seen now as just a fear tactic or campaign by Russia, as they would feel pretty defeated on the front lines by contrast as well. And in another quick mobilization blunder for the Russian forces, the mobilized Russian forces in occupied Crimea. Now, in this footage, they're wondering why they are mowing or digging grass instead of getting some real combat training in the camp during their staged or stay, depending, saying that's the kind of training we get here in the video. Instead of doing some training, I think they were literally just told to keep the base tidy instead. And in some lighter side of news, I haven't seen anything like this before, but recently in Kramatorsk in the Donbass, there was a feeding station installed for displaced pets. So obviously a lot of the humans have since relocated from Kramatorsk, leaving unfortunately a lot of animals there. And in this instance, we have the dogs very well trained or behaved to line up in a row as they wait to eat. And finally, in some news, perhaps another lighter piece, we have this Ukrainian training footage showing a soldier learning how to shoot an Igla manpad with a virtual reality headset. Pretty nifty stuff. The manpads are a type of man-portable air defense system that you pick up and you carry on your shoulder that have become a priceless asset within this ongoing war. But most of all, I guarantee not even 1 out of 1 million Russian conscripts will get this type of high-tech training, I mean, let alone any real training at all. So I'm going to leave it at that for today, guys. Thanks for watching. Please leave a comment, subscribe, hit that like button, and yeah, do definitely hope to see all you guys there in the next one. Cheers.